following conversation is with Steve Mardis of the Continental Breeding Station. Steve also has the Continental Classic One Loft race located in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Steve has, like myself, learned from his dad, Rick Mardis, and has applied what he has learned in the way he treats his race team, the way he handles his one loft, and what he provides and sells to his customers. I think you're going to have a good time listening to this conversation and learn a lot, whether you're a club racer or in the one loft game or looking for good quality pigeons. If you're enjoying these interviews, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment letting us know what you think. Thank you. All right, Steve Mardis, Continental Breeding Station. How are you?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Jeff?
Good. Well, you and I have it in common. We both grew up around the birds. Your dad and my dad, both very well known here in the United States and around the world. So when I ask you how you got started, I think it's obvious that you grew up around it and were around your dad, but tell me how you caught the bug, because it's not always something that goes generation to generation.
No, it isn't. My kids certainly don't seem to have much interest in it. So, but gosh, I don't remember a time we didn't have pigeons. And there was a time when everybody we knew had pigeons. I remember my little sister one time, we went to someone's house. My dad was in real estate and we went to some real estate function. And she was like, "Where is pigeons?" And the first guy she'd seen that didn't have pigeons. But I always enjoyed the pigeons. I liked them. Now, like most boys my age, I was made to do chores, and sometimes that was the pigeons. And I really liked them. I got into racing them when I was about 16. But at the same time, cars, girls. I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed being 16 a lot more.
Right.
And then later in life, as I got older and got married, and the opportunity to work with dad again, I was real fortunate. I got to, for 20 years, dad and I worked together. So, that can be a curse and a blessing. Yeah, I'm grateful for it. It was really cool. So.
Yeah, that can be a challenge working with family, especially your dad. But I have always enjoyed the time I've gotten to spend with my dad in the loft, even the times where we may have disagreed or butt heads on different ideas. But to be able to learn from someone like Rick is just a huge advantage for you, and really a blessing with all his knowledge and experience.
Oh, it absolutely was. I mean, everything I know about pigeons, I learned from him or people through him. I saw you had Serge on the other day, who's one of my idols in the pigeon sport. And those are the guys that Dad was always close with. I've known Serge a long time, and I've gotten a lot of good advice from Serge. Of course, the majority of what I know comes from Dad. Dad's always had a common sense approach to pigeon racing that, it's real easy to get caught up in theory and different things, but, Dad's always just been real common sense. And that's what I liked about Sergi and Andre Roadhawk, the same thing, just a real common sense approach to it without, overthinking it.
And when did you decide that you were going to fly your own team? Because there's been many years where you and your dad flew in the same club, and he would be top the champion standings, and you'd be right there, or vice versa. You'd be on top, and he'd be right there next to you on the national AU rankings and stuff. Was there a time where you flew together and learned from him, and then you took your own team, or was it something that right away you decided to do your own team, or how did that work?
No, what's funny is when I came to work for him here, he bought the house next door. Well, he didn't have a loft, and so he was still flying over here. And so we were flying as one team, and working the business. But then he decided he wanted to have birds next door. And some of that was just, it's hard to manage a team with someone else, even your dad or even your son. There's going to be things. There's always small differences, and you want to have 100% ownership in your team, and I think that was the case for both of us. So he built a loft next door, and then we were flying, one team from each address here, and truthfully, it got to be a little much for the club because And then that's when he moved to Texas. You know, and I grew up in Texas. We moved here in, I want to say 82. I was 14, 15 years old. But, you know, he has, you know, lifelong friends down there in the Dallas Denton area. And he'd always wanted to go back and fly with them again. And he did. So, you know, I think he looked at that time a lot like he looked at his time when he flew in Europe. You know, it was just something he'd always wanted to do. He always had a mind that he was going to get back to it. So.
When in 2000, I think 10, I had my own young bird team. My loft was next to my dad, similar to what you had set up. And it was the first race. I was really excited. I really worked hard. I did everything I could. I did some training a little bit on the side, separate from my dad. A lot of times we went together, but that first race, the birds were up in the sky. We're both calling them, and I'm excited. I'm ready. And all the birds that were there, probably 5 of them landed on his landing board and went in, and I got my ass kicked. And you know, do you have any stories like that where you guys were trying to get birds in? It's kind of anything interesting on that?
Absolutely. We flew from the south, and his loft was due south of mine by maybe, oh gosh, not much, 250 yards, maybe 1,000 feet. And I would always lose to him because as his birds would drop to the board, mine would circle. You know, mine would hesitate and then look at the board, do a little dive, and then come back and come into mine. You know, so I bet I lost that season. We typically have an 8-race season with two races a weekend, so 16 races. I bet I lost 7, 8 races by just mere seconds, and watched it. You know, was able to sit here and watch it happen.
Right.
So, and then there were other times when, you know, you get, you know, some days you get a screwy race, and there were days where he'd get a bird 30 minutes in front of me, and same for me. But always when we were next door to each other, he was my biggest competitor in the club. You know, and I was, like I said, but you know, and that's kudos to him. He taught me, you know, like I said, I wouldn't know near what I know about pigeons. You know, and I know guys that have been in this sport since I was a kid that you know, that just you know, still don't have the knowledge that you know, and I look at that because I had a shortcut. You know, I had someone that, you know, I could ask questions to.
Absolutely. It's a massive advantage for both of us to have that, you know, person we can call up at any time and learn from and mentor for sure.
And that's it. And, you know, Dad and I still talk every day. Matter of fact, he was here 15 minutes ago. Well, long story short, I gave him a bird for his race team that I'd committed to somebody else, so he had to bring it back. And so that was it. So then, of course, you know, he picked up some feed or did a couple things while he was here, and then he's going to watch my nephew play basketball down in Ada. So,
yeah.
But Dad and I talk pretty much daily.
Yeah, that's great. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you all were pretty early in the one loft process, kind of getting that going with the Mercedes and the Twister. Can you talk about how that kind of originated and what you guys did in the early days with that, when that began?
Yeah. Now, when Dad first started it, I wasn't here. I was off trying to make my own fame and fortune. But basically, electronic clocks. You know, once the Unicon came out, God, however long ago that was, you know, it made it possible to entertain the idea of a one-loft race. And one thing about Dad is, with pigeons and with business, he's always very forward thinking. You know, and he had the idea for a one-loft race. You know, and he'd been, you know, he's held all kinds of offices in the Texas Center and in the AU, so he'd, you know, been involved in all kinds of futurities and stuff. But he you know, he really liked the idea of a one-off race. Now that you have electronic clocking, you know, you can separate the drop, you know, who was actually trapping first. And so that was it. And it just, you know, it blossomed. He did real well with it. And then we had the Mercedes, and, you know, the Mercedes was you know, that was a great race. That was, you know, I think the biggest year we got about 1,200 birds, which, you know, now you've got races like Florida Pigeon Derby and Hoosier, which are, you know, getting, you know, 5,000 and up.
Right.
So, and I can only imagine the challenges those guys face. You know, when we had 1,200 birds, that had its own challenges. So, but kudos to those guys. You know, they, but yeah, one loft racing was just, you know, it was a way make money, a way to test pigeons. And as and now, it's become such a staple in our sport. And you talked about it with Surge, the fact that as a group, we're so spread out, unlike the
Right.
concentration they have in Europe.
Yeah, and I think that that's just unfortunately with club racing dwindling, that's going to be the option for a lot of people that don't have the scenario you and I have, where there's still quite a few people in the area that we can race against. And um, one loft allows you to meet other people in person and go and meet people you wouldn't have met otherwise. So there's definitely some positives to going, but um, I always and forever will love club racing the most, just because that's your hard work paying off, with your training and preparing the birds.
Well, and there's a big difference. And I'm all, I enjoy the one loft racing. Like you said, it's social. You get to see a lot of people. And I like to hit some local one loft races. I think they're bringing it back, but the Texas Shootout was always a fun race for us.
Yeah.
And we do some stuff like that. But I'm like you, the backyard racing. That's where that's where I cut my teeth on pigeons, was backyard racing. And not to knock anybody who only one off flies, but you learn so much when you actually have to breed and race and train.
Absolutely.
And then I think that gives us the ability. One thing is you do all that with your own team. Well, then now you're somewhat qualified to run a one off race. Because you've actually dealt with the care and the feeding of the birds, and what's going to make them perform and what's not. And that's my goal, is just to have get the best I can out of every pigeon.
Right.
Some pigeons, their best may not be much, but some it's great.
Yeah, and my dad, kind of in the 2008 to 10 range, wasn't as big a fan of one loft, because he always liked to keep his favorite pigeons here to race himself. And I decided in 2012, I think it was, I wanted to join you all in the Twister and kind of get my feet wet. And on the final race, I had one hen in the drop. I think there's 10 birds on the drop or something like that. But I actually got to drive. We went there in person. I think it was my dad and Steve King and I came up there in 2012. And you called the birds in. They went in, and you went in the loft, and I sat there kind of, I didn't really have any expectations, but you came out and said, "Hey Jeff, you got one in there," and that to me was something I'll never forget, because it was just an awesome moment where I thought, okay, this is pretty cool.
I remember that. And I really do like the one loft racing now. And I was much like your dad when it first came out. I thought it was more of a novelty. I didn't know that it would turn into what it is. And then once we started doing it, it really took us running a one loft race for me to see the seriousness and the amount of commitment that people have to these. And me too. And I look, sometimes, sometimes I get caught up in my own work, my own one-off race. But a couple of years ago, we were first on the Apple Cup at 309 miles. And I had no clue they were even racing that day until Dad texted me. He was like, "Hey, you just won the Apple Cup." And, and then sometimes, I get hit up by every one-off race in the nation to send birds. And sometimes you'll just flat out forget you sent birds to them until somebody calls them like, "Hey, you had a pretty good one. What was it?"
Right.
And it's not that I don't care, but there's certain races that I send to that I'm pretty passionate about. And sometimes you'll just flat out commit to send to a race, you send them, and then I've forgotten all about it because I've got kids and trying to
Busy
run a
man.
business, and I'm trying to run a race team, and it's just but I really enjoy the one-off racing, especially the races that are in the off season. I would say when you're not backyard racing, it kind of gives you I don't know, it keeps you in. It just keeps the excitement alive for the pigeons through the off season for me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I tell people, if they're going to select one lofts, is try to find something in your area where you can drive an hour or two and go watch in person. That's, obviously you guys do a great job there with your race, but how close it is also is always awesome to be able to see it in person. And so, I think that there's so many one lofts right now as well that no one person can afford to send to every single one of them. So, if you have to pick and choose, I think you have to find good handlers, experienced guys such as yourself that have been doing it a long time and know how to handle, a big group of birds and their health and training and everything that goes with it. What are some of the biggest challenges with hosting the one loft race? Because in the past you had the Mercedes, you had the Twister. Now you have the Continental Classic, and you're accepting birds, I think, pretty quick here, right?
I got the first. Tomorrow is the official day.
Right.
I got 4 birds in today. So
Okay.
those are
We're
the
getting
first.
started
There's
then.
4 birds out there in the law.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges that you face as a handler that people may not know about?
I think one of the challenges is one that, like us, we have a 90-day window to receive birds, which is fine if you manage it right. But I don't know how you do your race team, but like my race team, I typically, if I'm say I'm taking 80 young birds for myself, I'll typically have all 80 of those birds within hopefully a 2-week period. But if it's a month, it's 30 days. And so then I can work these birds. I can turn them all out on the board, let them in and out. And it's one group. Well, the problem with one-off race is if you send your birds on March 1st, but then, John over here sends his birds on May 15th. Well, that's 2.5 months. Your birds should be out and exercising at this point. And so now it's just a matter of coordinating groups, knowing who's ready to go out, who's not. The other issue, and I've seen this, is once you get over 300 birds in any loft, I think you're going to start. You need to be very aware of health concerns. And I think it's just a matter of you're taking all these different colonies, you're mixing them together, and then there's a difference in what people vaccinate for too. So you get birds that are vaccinated for some things, some birds are not. Now, every bird I get is vaccinated with PMV and rotavirus as soon as I get it. But I think that's just where management comes in. One thing is I'm here all day long. I have employees. And I'll tell you another big challenge that has just really cropped up. When I was a kid, Jeff, my dad, I was born in 1967. So, in the 70s and 80s, hawks weren't a problem like they are now.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a huge problem. I can't hardly turn the youngsters out without a hawk. So I have to have someone out in the yard at all times whenever those birds are outside until we get the last one in. And you know how it is, you get a stubborn bird or two. I can stand out in the yard 2 hours longer than I wanted to. And truthfully, I prefer, now there was a time when I preferred, with my own personal team, I preferred the loft line because I could watch them. I could see how well they're exercising. I can see who doesn't want to exercise. And it would tell me things that training doesn't always necessarily tell me, and training, you get some keys, you know who's late and stuff. But now I prefer training because if I loft lie, I am guaranteed to get hit by a hawk. When you live in Oklahoma, the Coopers are just rampant. And that's what is hard about when you're settling these youngsters, especially youngsters that somebody's paid you a fee to do a good job with, and a hawk hits your board. It's not just the one that the hawk may hit and injure or kill, but it's the 7 or 8 that take off in a panic that you may or may not see again. So hawks are a big challenge, and that's the other thing is because I've got a 3-month window, I've got the 3 months where I'm susceptible to hawk attacks.
Yeah, especially with the youngsters that get there maybe a month later than the ones that got there first. The ones that got there first, maybe they are flying well enough to where they can take off and come back, but one that's still learning to figure out the landing situation, trapping, and it takes off. All of a sudden, where am I? A hawk can scoop them off.
And that's the scariest part is when you turn them out for the very first time and they've never been off the board. And I have, I like my system. I have some pretty cool settling cages, so they get up on the board right away and learn how to trap, and they're protected in there from any predators or hawks. So, and I leave those up year round. And you saw them when you were here, but that's a system. Actually, there we go. Dad came up with that system for his old birds down in Texas, and it's just. And now he has the same system on his loft. I have it on mine. It's just. I really like it. So and it allows me to funnel the birds in where I want them to go. If I've got late birds, I want to look at, because that's what happens when I start training them on a regular basis. We'll start training depending on the weather, September, October. But once I start training them on a regular basis, I want to know who comes in. Once the main group's in, I'll close everything down, funnel any bird that comes in after that into its own pen. So then I can look at it, because the last thing I want to do is, if your bird's hurting, I don't want to send it, 40 miles down the road.
Right.
Guarantee a loss. And sometimes, and that allows me to see birds that maybe hit a wire, that are injured, and so that's just it. And that's the thing, is it's a daily management, just looking at birds. And what I'm looking for is, I'm not looking to see whose bird I think is best. I'm looking for problems. What birds have problems.
Yeah, and that's probably such a challenge for Florida Pigeon Derby and Hoosier to give that one-on-one attention when you got 4,000 or 5,000 pigeons. So it's has to be a big challenge to be able, if you catch one that you see's got a problem, then that might be a lucky bird that that got.
Well, and that's it with 5,000 birds. And I don't care how good a pigeon man you are, and I think Jim and Kelly do a great job. But
Absolutely.
But say you have 4 employees. Well, those employees, they don't see what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And not because they're not looking, but they don't have the experience. They don't have, they don't see, and I have a guy here that's worked for me for a long, long time, but he still doesn't see what I see. Now I have another guy, Dale.
Yeah.
And Dale is, but Dale grew up racing pigeons,
Yeah.
So Dale and I see what I see. Sometimes he sees what I don't, and sometimes I see what he doesn't. But he's a good pigeon man, and I'm lucky to have his set of eyes here too.
Absolutely, yeah, he's great. And so, what's your advice to a breeder that's going to send out to a one loft from the one loft manager perspective? If you had a blueprint that someone could follow that gives you the best chance for your birds to show up, be healthy, be the right age. I think a lot of people struggle with the timing to send birds. Sometimes they're too young. Sometimes they aren't vaccinated. They're overcrowded in the box. What's the good blueprint for getting your birds there and having the best chance?
Well, I think one is planning. Know when your race starts accepting birds. Determine when you want to send those birds, and then plan it out accordingly. Now, of course, things come up. Hens don't lay on the time frame you want sometimes, or maybe the eggs are clear. But that's to have a backup here. Now, I recommend to anybody, if you send to a one loft race, and I do it too, is send first vaccinate them yourself. All the races are going to do it, but I like to vaccinate them, and one is because all vaccines have an incubation period, and I feel like I'm just ahead of the game if I vaccinate it. And if you vaccinate, and truthfully, PMV's mild. If you vaccinate them 2 or 3 times within a month, you're not going to hurt that pigeon, But I'd much rather it be vaccinated. And other than that, I think it just starts with good care in the loft. What are the parents getting that are feeding these youngsters up until you send them to me, and I like to use a good 14% feed. I have it mixed here locally, and it's a recipe that we've been using for years. Dad actually came up with it, and so it's got the carbs and fat the youngsters need, and I'll pretty much feed them that year round. Now, as we get into the races, I add more fat and carbs to it, whether that's safflower or sunflower hearts.
Right.
Occasionally hemp seed, but I tell you the truth, with hemp seed, I haven't had luck in the last 10 years of getting hemp seed that my birds will eat. They just, I paid $50 or more for a bag for it, and I feel like I'm throwing it out. So, but safflower they eat, and that's something that Dad told me a long time ago too, is I don't overthink the feed. If I go in there and feed them and they eat up all the corn, then I give them more corn. Dad said that to me a long time ago. Those birds know more about what they need than you do.
Right.
And that's always been successful for me. If I see that they're eating something first, and there's grains that they're always going to leave for last, red Milo, because it's very bitter, So that's just it. I try to give them what they want, and that's another thing. Once I get into training them, I keep these birds when I get them. I don't keep them hungry. They get all they want once a day. And that's when I call them in, and I try to have a routine. You know, if I'm going to do it at 10 a.m. every day, then we're going to go in and feed them at 10 a.m. Well, by 11:30, I'm going to pick everything up, and then they don't eat again until the next day. Which again comes into management. Once you're training, is another reason I funnel them into it if they're late, because I do want them to, you know, the last thing I want is a pigeon that's been out to come home and not get to eat, because now you're just putting it further behind the 8 ball than it already was.
Right.
So, you know, that's just, but as far as sending them to a one-off race, I think good, healthy youngsters, if you're new at it, you know, go visit some lofts. You know, I think that's key. Go visit some lofts, look at what healthy youngsters are, you know. I like to see them feather in the wing. Now, I'd almost rather get a bird a little too old than a little too young as a one loft guy, because I'm wide open here with a lot of pigeons, so I can settle a bird that's a little older. But sometimes you get these birds that are young and they're timid and they sit in the loft and they don't eat and they're not green under the wing. And I've had them both ways. And I think that's it. And I think the last thing I'll say is, if you have a bird, if you suspect it's got something wrong with it at all, whether it's pox or it doesn't act right, don't send it.
Right.
Yeah, because one, you're not going to do yourselves any favor. If it's sick as a youngster, the chances of it being a good bird are probably lessened considerably, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. If your birds aren't able to handle just being at your loft to start with, sending them to one loft, you're just donating at that point, and you're probably going to get your bird sent back to you anyway. I'm sure that you've had that scenario where the bird just
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
being
and I've
brought
had
in.
new guys where I've called them and told them, because I don't want to take somebody's. I mean, you know, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but I've had birds that I've called the guy and said, hey, I wouldn't. I'm not going to let you invest $500 or $600 to enter these birds, you know.
Right.
And that's and then, but then, you know, but you know, feel free to ask questions. I get people call me all the time, you know, with specific questions about what they should do, and you know, I want them to be successful. I want them to think we did a good job and enter my race the
Right.
next year. So.
Well, I can say from my experience with your race over the years, and the new Continental Classic, that the birds are always prepared right. I got to handle my birds after the race, and they were in great condition. So I think you do a great job with that.
Well, and you know, that was one reason we didn't have a one loft race for about 5 years. I have kids, and they were right middle school and high school
Yeah.
sports, and that was it. I didn't feel like I could. I just felt like it was more work than I could feasibly handle at that point in my life. You know, now my daughter's off in college and my son's driving, so you know, now I've got a lot more free time.
Yeah, and
So,
you don't want to commit to that if you can't put your all into it and do it
that's right. That's
right.
exactly right. If I can't do a good job, I don't want to do it.
So let's talk about your businesses for our CBS goes with bringing in birds. When did you start going to Belgium with your dad? Do you remember going over there and handling birds for the first time and some of that journey?
I went the very first time to Belgium when I was maybe 19, 20 years old. And actually, I had a sister at the time who lived in Germany.
Oh
And
wow.
it was right around the holidays. So we went and did all that. And I went with dad to a few lofts, but I didn't go back again until 2000. I think 2001 was the next time I went. And then I would have been about 30. And so then, since 2001, the last time I went was in 2020. But in those 20 years, I was going twice a year. I mean, twice a year and a couple times three. So I probably went 45 times in those
Right.
20 years. And and you know, I love Belgium. I love the people. I love the pigeon sport over there. I've made a lot of good friends. I don't care for airports or air travel or
Yeah, I
jet
don't either.
lag. Uh, it- but but I do you know, I could see myself, if life were different, living in Belgium
Oh yeah.
and flying pigeons. And but you know, I've been to Guadalajara and did a couple auctions down there, and you know, their weather's optimal. You know, you talk about one-off races. Guadalajara, I get hit up by races out of Mexico all the time,
Hmm.
and uh, and you know, I think that's a growing. I think they're one of the few spots in the world where young people are actually taking up the sport more. you know.
That's
And when I
interesting.
say young, you know, I'm talking guys my age, and you're younger
Hmm.
than me, obviously.
Hmm.
But you know, in some circles, I'm considered young.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, so you started going over there, and your dad was bringing in birds, and Serge obviously was a part of that process of kind of helping you guys get pigeons. Do you remember going? I know you've been to Dirk Van Dyke's Loft and Koopman and Van Denneville, all the big names. Do you have a moment over there that was extra special that really blew your mind, or was just a big eye-opening experience? I know you've been over there so many times, it probably blurs together a little bit, but is there something that an individual moment there?
No, not really. I mean, you know, I mean, there's a lot of individual moments. I mean, I got to spend a lot of time with Leo Van Ryn, you know, the guy who bred Kaiser.
Hmm.
And you know, Leo, I consider a friend, and I still email. And of course, Serge and Andre, and, you know, Michael Buick with the Jan Ardens.
Right.
And I really enjoyed some time I spent with Michael and his wife, Mimi. You know, we had some fun. But I mean, it was just, that was it, just the relationships. Now, I will say, you know, it really saddened me more than I thought it would when Dirk passed, because he was just such an upfront guy, and Dad had been dealing with him for years. But of course, I'd known him for, oh gosh, 22, 23 years at the time he passed. And he was just such a genuine, honest person, and just such a passion for the pigeons, and just such quality pigeons, you know, just everything there. He would, you know, and so, you know, when we were going 2 times a year, I mean, he was like a must. We would always see him every time, and I would always commit to buy something there because it was so good. And you know, and that's the way Dirk was. I hadn't, in all that time, I had one cock I bought, and he wouldn't fertile an egg. And I didn't expect Dirk to really do anything about it. But I emailed him and said, "Hey, this bird." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll send you one." And he picks me one. And you know, when I get it, and I don't know if he's that good or it was lucky, but you know, the very first year, it bred me a superstar. So it
Wow.
was just, you know, and that's what I really appreciated about Dirk, is he wanted to sing, he wanted you to have success with his pigeons.
Right. And so when you're bringing stuff in, Rick talked about, people like what birds you have there, but they're also wanting to know what's new. What's the process for you to bring in new pigeons? Is that something that you continue to do and are still always looking for?
Really, results. You know, that's just it. And that was one reason I kept going back to Dirk, was because he was, you know, year after year he's having the ace pigeon of Belgium, or the runner up, or you know, and Serge, you know, Serge and Andre have both been king of the Antwerpinian so many times. I mean, I'm just looking for successful lofts, which is, you know, Bosfer Kirk, and whether it's Belgium or Holland. Lately, most of my business has been in Belgium, but you know, you just look for who's hot. You know, Bosfer Kirk. I'll tell you who's hot right now. Boss is still real hot in Holland. So is Willem de Braun.
Right.
You know, and so that's what I want to look. I mean, that's how I ended up with Mark and Geert Poland, because they were just really, really having success at the long distance. And like the German fancier that I had some long distance from, Freldenhofen. And so that's really it. Just looking at the results, who's and who's consistently at the top. You know, some guys will have a good year, or maybe a couple of good races, or you know, a good national race, but that's all they've ever done. And I want to see consistency. You know,
Right.
who's consistently flying well, and
And so,
that's you know,
but,
and that's, you know, Guy Vandal
mhm,
uh, is one of those guys. You know, and
right.
that's what led me to Guy. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited. You and I both got or I got one pigeon off his auction. You got a few as well. And I got to go to his loft. Serge took me over there, and he just has a really awesome setup and fantastic pigeons. And
He does. He has a
he,
beautiful yard.
yeah, it's a beautiful place over there. And he's done a lot of co-breeding with other national winners, and so that's what some of the pigeons on that auction were. So I'm really excited about that as well.
They but yeah, I mean, I just had such good memories. And like you know, I still talk to Serge pretty regularly. And then of course, you know, you know, we had a group that went with us for all those years, you know, Bruce Gordon and Mike Ludolph, and a friend of Dad's since childhood, a guy named Gary Williford, who passed away this year.
Mm.
But so, yeah, I mean, they were all special times. It was just kind of, you know, it was like a week where, you know, 4 guys who were just really crazy about pigeons got to go look at some of the best in the world and purchase some.
Right. Yeah, I wish they'd come up with a way to get us there a little quicker, because it's a
Yeah, no kidding.
it's a
No
bit of
kidding.
tough travel, but once you're there, it's amazing. But the thought of the journeys gets me a little shaky. But
Yeah, well, you know, you talk about a special time. Here's one that just occurred to me. Uh, I went to the Jansen brothers for the first time, and you know, I got to sit in the chair, and they bring out the little rusty tin of cookies, and I'll never forget when I got back. Serge said, "So y'all went to the Jansen brothers?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did they bring out the cookies?" And I said, "Yeah, they brought out the cookies." He said, "Well, they liked you then." I said,
that's awesome. Yeah, I
So,
got to.
I saw Louis Jansen probably, I was probably at his house 3 or 4 times before he passed, and got a picture out by the little well where they drew the water. And, you know, as far as history goes, that was pretty neat. And that whole story is pretty neat if you know much about the Jansen brothers.
Yeah, that's an incredible experience that you got to be a part of, that I'm sure a lot of people are jealous of because of the history of them. And well, I went to the Shoemaker Pigeon Center there in Belgium, and they have the Jansen Brothers lofts. They have those chairs. They have the living room set up in the museum just like they had it in their house. So it's something cool for people to go see if they do go over there. I'd recommend that for sure.
Well, you know, you'd walk into this living room, and this living room was decorated like it could have been from the 1950s.
Mhm.
Except on one desk, there's a big flat screen TV, you know, but other than that, you would think you walked back in time.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Well, what characteristics are you looking for in pigeons if you're able to? I know sometimes we have no choice. We have to go with fanciers we trust and ask them what they recommend. But if you're in person, you're handling pigeons, what are you looking for personally that you like about a pigeon? Is there certain traits, characteristics that you're looking for?
Yeah. Personally, size. Size is the first thing. I like a pigeon that's not too big, not too small, what we would call medium. Um, I like pigeons that maybe it'll become a little deeper than some guys. But I've had a lot of good pigeons that some guys would consider deep. Kaiser was one.
Hmm.
You know, Thunder was one. And I'm not saying I go out and specifically pick deep pigeons, but I'm just saying I won't cross it off my list because it's tad deep. Now, if it's
Right.
super deep, uh, you know, that's one thing. If it's an obvious flaw, medium sized buoyancy. I really like a pigeon that's buoyant or corky. Uh, you know, and I've heard this so many times in my life. You know, we're building airplanes, not tanks.
Right.
You know, so I want a pigeon that's buoyant that I don't. And we've all, you know, if you put a pigeon in my hand that feels like a brick, um, I'm probably going to pass on it without
Right.
even looking at anything else because I think buoyancy is so key. You know, and then other than that, you know, I watched an interview with Serge, and he really does like tight vents. I like tight vents, um, but again, you know, that's not all. And you know, this is something you know that my dad said to me years ago. You know, everything means something, but nothing means everything.
Right.
You know? And so, you know, I can, you know, if I look at a pigeon and it's a beautiful specimen, but maybe its vents aren't perfect, well, I can overlook that. But what I do look for now, like my own race team, anything with obvious flaws, I'm probably going to pull off the race team and call.
Right.
Um, if it's a little big or a little small or maybe has a feature I don't like, I'm going to give it a chance because I've had a lot of those pigeons do well. Now, if it's something that I don't think is breedable, because I'm in sales, if I can't breed nice pigeons out, then I'm probably not going to keep it around. Because last thing I want is a you know first prize winner that's ugly that I can't sell his babies.
Right.
And you know you talk about that what you're looking for a pigeon. You know that's the funny thing too. When you're in sales, you have to have a sellable pigeon.
Right.
Now, Dad and I, we thought Van Dennebills were great pigeons years before we ever brought them in. But truthfully, the pigeons we went over there and handled weren't sellable. You
Right.
know, they were very vanilla. They were some of them were rangy and raw, but nobody was flying. I mean, but nobody was flying better. And I think that's what we lose sight of too in this sport, is that a lot of the things that we're breeding for, we can't really see. Now we can see a pigeon that's obviously flawed, that's too
Right.
big. Maybe its wings are too small to be proportionately, athletic for that pigeon. But what you can't see is how intelligent that pigeon is. Now it may come from an intelligent family. The odds could be that it's highly intelligent, but it may not be either. But that's what we're looking for. Ultimately, you're looking for a pigeon that's going to find its line home, that can keep a consistent speed, and that's what's going to do it. And you look at, I had a guy in racehorses telling me, he said, all racehorses run about the same speed. It's who's got that little extra that can pull ahead, and that's what we're looking for in pigeons. And I think you have to look at the physical attributes. I think they mean a lot, but I think a lot of times, I can promise you that when I go out to my race team every year, my eyes will land on one pigeon that I think is the nicest in the loft. And very rarely is he my best pigeon.
Right.
So that's just it. Like I said, everything means something, but nothing means everything.
Yeah, you have to let the results show you. And
that's it. The basket, and if you're not using the basket to decide, then you're probably getting rid of some pigeons you shouldn't be. And maybe, I just think the basket has to be the ultimate decider.
Right. Well, what products are you using when you're racing your own personal team? We've talked kind of on the one loft side of things. What are you doing? What are you doing to prepare your race team during the week, and products and training and whatnot?
I don't use many supplements. Now, what I do is before the season, I'll treat my young birds for respiratory. And I just do it automatically now. And I'll tell you why. Dad talked about the lab in Texas that we would send.
Right, right.
Well, like 4 years in a row, I would do my swabs. I'd send my stuff off to the lab, and I would be positive.
Mm-hmm.
I would treat them for 7 to 10 days, re-swab them, send my results off to the lab, and I'd be clean. And you could see a difference. You could see a big difference. So now I just assume I'm dirty.
Right.
So I just treat. I save myself the $100 or whatever it costs to have them tested. I just assume I'm dirty. I treat them with Doxy T or Doxy Til for 7 to 10 days, and then I go from there. Now, as far as feed, like I said, I'm giving them a really good feed, whole grains. I don't give them any pellets or anything like that. Although there are some new pellets on the market, and I heard Serge talking about there are some pellets that I may experiment with. But I had a guy tell me in Europe years ago. He said they were talking about pellets, and they were talking about, and the guy made sense. He said, "Well, pigeons don't eat pellets in the wild, and it's because there's not pellets."
Right.
And so I've always, I don't know, maybe I've got a bias against pellets. I like whole grains. I think that's what pigeons are meant to eat.
Right.
I like to give a lot of grit, and what I do is I get granite, I mix it with oyster shell, half and half, and then I have this red mineral, and 2 different minerals I can use: Super 8 or another one that's called I've used it for 20 years. I can't think of the name. Sweet Licks.
Yeah.
And I'll add that into it. And the birds really, really like that. And then I have a feed store that gets me some specialty grits, that black grit that smells like anise.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get a red grit. And during the race season, I like to give them a whole lot of grit. I just think it really helps them aid with digestion. I think it gets them the minerals that they don't get, because I think our grain is getting mineral deficient.
Sure.
And I think that what I get from these minerals, these cattle minerals that I give, I think really help. And that's something I learned from Dad. These weren't my ideas. These were what was taught to me. But I know that I see a huge difference. And what's amazing is the cattle mineral occasionally will run especially during COVID, you'd have shortages.
Right.
And so they go a few days without it, and you put it in front of them, they go at it like it's candy. I mean, it's just. And like I said, that's again where the birds let me know what they need more than I know.
Where do you find that product?
Well, here in Oklahoma, I get it from Stillwater Milling. You probably have one over close to you in Tulsa,
right.
But it's always a special order deal. And so that's just it. Dale would know more. Dale actually orders it. He probably knows where we got the last ones from. And Dad, actually, and that's not true. The last time I got it, Dad had to drive to Jones, Oklahoma. He was picking some up for him. And I said, well, get me 5 or 6 bags or whatever it got. So it's just, it's kind of something that you're always scouting for. But here in Oklahoma, we have enough farming and cattle that there's always a product that.
Right. And what is the exercise like for the week with your personal birds?
Okay, now once I like to start, we start racing typically here the end of September.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to pull the 10th flight. And so I typically myself, I pull around July 4th, I'll pull the 10th flight. I'll list every bird, I'll pox every bird at this point. This is on or around July 4th. And what that does is once I pull this 10th flight, it gives me 6 weeks to get it back in. Well, if I do it right, I can exercise these birds during those 6 weeks. And then when I start training them, they've got all 10 flights. Because we fly a lot later than most people, you know,
Right.
late September. So now I'm training with birds that are fully molted out. And I'm feeding them, but during this period, I'm pretty much feeding them all they want. Because here's what I believe about feeding young pigeons. When you restrict their feed, you restrict them from exercising, you slow down their molt, and you slow down their muscle development, which are 3 key things you want to be doing with young birds. So, and I'm not talking about teaching them to trap, but I give them all they want once I start working. Once that's loft flying, and I want them loft flying an hour, anywhere from an hour to 2 hours before I start training.
Right.
And when I start training them, and over the, now with my personal birds, I'll take them a mile. I'll start them up, I'll crate them, I'll let them go in the yard. Then I'll take them across the street and I'll jump them to 5 miles. Now with the one loft birds, because they're not mine and I'm a little more hesitant, but I really baby those birds out to 5 miles. Then I baby them from 5 to 10. And I get a lot of short tosses on them early, whereas my own birds, I wouldn't do that because, you know, if I lose my bird, that's on me. If I lose your bird and you paid me for it, I don't feel good about that.
Right.
So then once I start training them, you know how the weather here is in Oklahoma. Once I start training them September, you've got dove season, so you've got a few days off there. But I train them every day the weather permits. If that's 7 days a week, that's 7 days a week. It's usually not. Usually you hit some storms, you know, those fall storms, and you can't really train for a day or two. But I train them every day possible. And if our first race is 100 miles, I like to get them to about 80 miles before the first race. Now in young birds, I fly a bit of a widowhood system. Is once I go to the first race, once those babies once they come home, they're separated. They're separated all week. They're exercised separately. They don't get to see each other until, what I'll do is if we basket Friday, I'll go out there, I'll feed them Friday morning, and about lunchtime, I'll let them all together into the nest area, you know, and then I'll ship them. Now, if it's a fast race, if they're home by noon on Saturday, then I'll separate them on Saturday. Now, if it's a tougher race, and this goes for young birds or old birds, if it's a tougher race and they really work to get home, then I might let them stay together till Sunday.
Right. And the goal there is to get them motivated to come home to each other. And
exactly. Yeah. And on Sunday, now if we race Saturday, Sunday I don't fly them. I let them stay in the loft. And Monday I start exercising. And on Monday, they're forced outside, but they're not forced to stay outside.
Right.
So now by Thursday, any bird that's not giving me a full hour on the exercise, I'm looking at it. You know, what's wrong here?
Right.
And that bird's probably not going to go. But you know, that's it. You know, it's been my experience that those birds will tell you, and they tell you who's ready. You know, if you're watching, you know who's fit and who's not. And I think that's a subtle art of the sport that, you know, it takes time to learn. Some guys never get it, but it's, you know, to see it's easy to say I have a flock of 30 pigeons. You got to be able to see those individual pigeons, you know, and Dad's key at that. Dad, you know, when Dad was young, he could pick pigeons out of the air. You know, it looked like but he always had better eyesight than me too. So
Right, right. Yeah, and I think spending time with the birds and learning them individually gives you an advantage, because when their behavior changes, you'll recognize, hey, this isn't quite what you're used to doing here. What's up? What's going on? So I think if you have a personal race team that has 100 to 150 birds in it, it's much harder to manage and know all of that versus 30, 40, whatever
It,
birds.
oh, I think so. I'm a big, and that's from some of these guys. They get started and they think that I need a whole lot of birds, and like I said, I like to start with 75, 80 for the season. But I know guys are starting with 150. Well, that's like you said, they don't know what they've got. They don't know who's who. They're just numbers, and but that's the other thing too is I think one thing that and maybe it's why the sport's going, but to be competitive at pigeon racing, it has to be a year-round thing,
Hmm.
and I promise you, you know, my dad and your dad were thinking about young birds long before my dad is the minute old bird season is over, his focus shifts to young birds,
Right.
you know, and what am I doing? Am I on schedule here? What is my schedule? What are my goals? And I think that's so key. And I know a lot of guys that they start thinking about young birds about a month before the first young bird race. Well, if you've done that, then I've already beat you. My
Right.
dad beat you. And I think, but that's a big commitment. If you have kids and a full-time job, it is hard to be pigeons year round,
Right.
which I think that's what the one loft opens up is these people who, let's face it, if you and I had real jobs and if I had to punch a clock from 8 to 5 every day, I'm not going to be able to accomplish any what I can accomplish by being home all day and
Absolutely.
seeing
Right.
birds. And then, how many guys are training their birds at work and they don't even see them come home. They don't know that a hawk hit them or who stayed out or who came late. So I mean, there's some advantages. I think that the one loft opens doors for a lot of these people who want to be involved in pigeons but don't have the time to commit. Now, and some people just want to race and see their pigeons come home. Me, when I race, I want to be competitive. I don't want
Right.
to. I don't need to win every race. I'd like to, but I want to be competitive in every race.
Yeah.
And I almost a little too much. I mean, I
Yeah.
can get
We're both a
it
little
puts me in a
crazy.
foul. Right. And that's one thing about electronic clocking is we use the benzing now, and it's like, man, it can ruin my whole weekend if I feel like I've got a good bird, and then I see someone has picked me up. It's like, and but that's just the competitive nature, and
Yeah. Yeah. My wife flies her own team now, and so it's made me definitely more relaxed on race day to just enjoy it. We both enjoy watching them come in, and we're extremely competitive here. But I've gotten much better about not letting it, get to me too bad. I just try to think about what I can do a little bit better the next week, and then I move on. But in my younger days, boy, it would take me a few days to get over a bad week, and I'd beat myself up on what I could have done or what I should have done. And everybody has those times, but if you're consistent in what you're doing, you're consistent in the process. Often, more often than not, your birds will rise to the top at some point. So,
well, and that's just it. A lot of guys will ask me, well, what do you think about this guy's system or this guy's system or what this guy does? And I don't know what everybody does. I know what I do, but I know this: if you find someone who's successful and they're telling you what they do, you should probably listen.
hmm.
And then whatever you decide to do, be consistent at it. It's like feeding. If you're gonna, I like to feed at the same time every day. I like to turn my birds out at the same time every day. I like to call them in at the same time every day. I like to go out in the evening at the same time every day and look at them. And it's just be consistent. Don't. You know, I know. If you're running in there and you're throwing feed at them and then you're bursting out the door, you're not going to be at the top.
Right.
For sure. And then the other thing is too, it takes quality animals
Hmm.
for sure. That's the thing. If you're new at it, I would say, um, get you some pigeons that are nice specimens. Probably don't spend a lot of money until you learn how to take care of them. And and you talked about what I would send to a one-off race. Well, for me and you, it's a little easier. So if I've got something performing here, um, Well, I might send something off that to the one-off races because and that's that's how a lot of guys, Tom Schilling bred the South Africa winner, and that started. That was a pair that was here.
Right. I was going to ask you about Little Miss Nikki, right?
Right. So that was a pair that was here. Well, his uncle bought a kit from me, and I put one in this kit out of it. Well, it was champion bird of the combine. Well, then Tom calls and says, "Can I buy the pair?" And long story short, I sent him the pair. But I mean, that's what I'm saying is they saw in their own combine that this hen was just consistently at the top. And she was off this pair, and that was the pair I'd put together. And so that was just, I think that's it. I think, and that's what I try to send to is, I'm not going to send pigeons that I'm not having success with, obviously.
Right.
You know, and everybody, and I hear people say, well, there's a one loft, and maybe there is a little bit more of a one loft. I think that takes that pigeon we talked about, but I think it's the same pigeon in the racing. You need a pigeon that's gonna home quickly. It's gonna find the right line, and then it's gonna consistently flap its wings to get there. And so, all one off, people talk about one off pigeons like it's a different breed. Well, all one off pigeons came from
club racing.
Backyard, yeah, club pigeons at club raced. I mean, 30 years ago, one off racing wasn't a thing, So I think that's it. I think good pigeons are good pigeons wherever.
It makes sense. Yeah. There is a lot of people that have different theories on that. If there is a one loft bird versus a club bird and the differences in between. But I
But I do like what you said, find pigeons that do well in your area, whether that's club or one loft, find pigeons that are doing well in that climate, that terrain, that area. Right. And, and hopefully, find a handler that does things somewhat the way you would do them. Nobody's going to do things 100% the way you do them, but find a guy that feeds the way you like, that has the training the way you like, that has things you like. And sometimes that's just trial and error. You have to find that.
Yeah, I think much like you need to study results of pigeons that you may want to buy, if you want to talk to somebody about buying their pigeons, much like you're studying their results, it's good to study these one lofts, see what speeds their races are at, see what they start with and what they finish with on their numbers, see, a lot of these races like yours, and I think Rick Me at the Apple Cup does a great job of this too, is updates and, consistently letting you know what's going on and what they're doing, and if you're studying these one lofts, you'll find one that, fits what you're looking for.
Yeah, there's plenty of them. And there are a lot of good ones out there. And that's just it. Look and see who's, and as a one-off manager, we talked about the challenges. Some of the challenges are you've got people that want they want tough races, but they don't want any bird losses.
Right.
The two don't go hand in hand. We know from experience, the slower the speeds get, the more birds are going to lose. And in club racing for sure, I always said that, once you got below 40 miles an hour, you're going to have big losses. And that's the way it was in club racing. Now, club racing is a little different. Birds go in different places. One loft race, but it's the same thing. I don't want to put any birds up into a 25-mile-an-hour headwind. And that's why it's hard for me to set firm race dates. I always say, well, the first week of October, second, because in Oklahoma, the wind is always blowing. You get very few days where the wind's not blowing. So my job is to get a day where the wind's blowing somewhat mildly. Because I'm like you, when I send you a one-off race, I don't like speeds of 1,600 yards a minute, 1,900 yards a minute. I want anywhere from the, say 12 to 14 range. I think that's real work. And I think that's what I liked about the Continental last year is we had one race that was right at 7 hours on the wing, another race that was right at 8 hours on the wing. I think that's where you really test a pigeon. Look, all pigeons can fly 100 miles.
Right.
Almost all pigeons can fly 150 miles and make the same speeds. You have to get out. I think at 6 hours on the wing, you really start seeing who's a racer and who's not.
Well, now, and this is me saying this. This isn't Steve Mardis saying this for people watching, but I think this is a little bit of a joke, but partly true. I think the toughest challenge for one loft managers isn't so much the pigeons and the health, but it's probably dealing with the fanciers and their expectations. So that, again, that's me saying that. You didn't say that, but dealing with the people is probably a big challenge too, because you get a lot of different viewpoints on what you should be doing and all that. So
And I agree with that. And you do have some people that get some unrealistic expectations. And but also, you know, I try to look at it too as if let's say you have a one loft race, Jeff, and I send 10 birds to you, okay? And you lose on 100 miles, you lose 7 of those 10. But of the rest of your flock, you only lost 10%. So you lost 10%, but you lost 70% of mine. That's on me.
right,
You know, that's something I did wasn't right there. Now, if I send 10 birds to you and you lose 7 on the first toss, but you lost 70% of everybody's birds, well, then that's probably on you. You probably did something wrong in management, you know.
right.
So that's the way I look at it too. Is I don't get, you know, I enter in a lot of one-off races, and guy will call me and tell me, you know, and they're always, and I get it because you feel so guilty. Like I said, somebody's paid this money, and you hate to call them and tell them, hey, we didn't inventory, your bird's not here. But
Right.
guys call me, and you can always tell they're a little hesitant. They don't like making these calls. I get it. I understand that's pigeon racing. And if you backyard flew along as I did, I lost a lot of good pigeons to hawks. And I'm talking pigeons that were, you know, I had a pigeon number 2. She won 3 races as a young bird. I started exercising her as an old bird. She gets hit by a hawk. And she recovers. She looks fine, but she never flew the same.
Right.
You know, and I can't blame anybody for that. That's just nature, you know. I mean,
Yeah. It's like an athlete football player that gets an injured knee or something.
right. You blow out your knee. That's right. That's nobody's fault.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure on some of these tosses, when you have big flocks of birds being released, you know, there's the uh, hunters, there's wires, there's owls, there's hawks. There's so many factors that come into the birds coming home. So like you said, if you're losing birds here or there due to those factors, that's certainly out of your control. But if it's big losses over and over again, then there's probably something else going on that we're not seeing. So,
And then, like I said too, if you're participating in a one-off race and the majority of your birds are getting lost, but the handler himself is not really, you know, I mean, he's losing about what you expect, and it's, you know, you probably ought to look inwardly a little bit at that, and you know, did I not send what I needed to? Were they not healthy enough? You know, where can I improve that?
right. Is there a distance that you prefer when you're flying personally? Is there your favorite kind of race as far as, do you prefer middle? Do you like the long distance? Do you like the sprint? What is your favorite when you're racing?
My favorite races are really, like, if I lived in Belgium and could specialize, I would be middle to heavy middle distance. And from that, I'm talking 300 right up to the door of 500 miles. That little spot right there, 300, 500. You know, like I said, I'm a firm believer that every pigeon can fly 100 miles. 99% can fly 150 miles. You know, I think when you win races 300 miles and above, I think those are really more prestigious. I think it tells you a lot more about the pigeon, and I think that's why all the one-off race. I mean, you know, that's why the main event at all these races is 300 miles. You know, I want to see birds that have flown over 6 hours at a minimum to make a judgment on it.
Right.
You know, and I do that with my own race team. If I get down to the last 300 of the season as a young bird and these birds haven't gone, well, I'm almost obligated to send them because I want to see, you know, this is your last chance to show me something. And if you can show me something on a 300, you might warrant a second look. But you know, and I've got pigeons that, you know, win at 100 and win at 150. And I just really, Serge talked about it. You know,
Right.
I'm not
Yeah.
looking for 150-mile winners.
Right.
I mean, I want 300-mile winners.
Right. Well, we kind of went over advice to new flyers already. I think you gave some great points for that. We don't really need to dig more into that. Let's talk about where people can find you and your business and your one loft. So your website, cbspigeon.com.
And my one loft race is and everybody, if you do a Google search, Continental Classic, but it's thecontinentalclassic.com. I've tried to buy continentalclassic.com, but it's been bought by one of these, like, you know, one of these companies that buys up all these web domains. And anyhow, they want they want a pricey sum for me just to drop the word the. But anyhow, the Continental Classic. We're in the process of changing it over to a different software as we speak. But email cbspigeon@cbspigeon.com or call us 405-691-1313. But my website, if you Google CBS Pigeon or just go to cbspigeon.com, you'll find us pretty easy.
And people can find pigeons for sale there, different price ranges, no matter what your budget is. And
Exactly.
I
And
think you put on a great race too, so people need to check that out. You're taking birds starting tomorrow.
That's right.
And
So
what's your window when it stops?
we end May 31st.
May 31st. Okay. And is it remind me, 3 races, 4 races?
It's oh gosh, I've done it both ways. I think it was 4 races last year.
4 races.
Yeah, it was 150, 250,
350.
and 3.
Yeah, 3.
No, it was 152, 3, 350.
350. Okay.
Either way, my brochure, look on my website.
They can find out on the website.
No, I'm getting old and the years run together, so
yeah,
it's
I understand.
I don't always remember.
But no, but I think it's a great race people should check out. And if people want to add some new pigeons to their bloodlines, or maybe they're just getting started, you're a great option for them at different price ranges to meet anyone's budget. And you're always very kind with your time, and I appreciate it.
Hey, well, I appreciate it. Hey, and I just want to give you a little kudos for what you're doing. I've watched all your videos with Yellow Rose Ears and with Surge and with Dad, and I think it's great. And I think this is I think that's just a cool resource for new flyers and experienced flyers. I've had so many people reach out to me about it. So, man, keep it up. I've really enjoyed them today, and I'm honored to be a guest. So
yeah, well, you and I have known each other a long time, and I always enjoy getting to come and visit your loft and seeing your birds, and it's always a fun experience. And you and your dad both have helped me a lot, and your dad really got me set up over there in Belgium when I went in 22. And so you all have a special place in my heart, and I want people to know about you all. But yeah, thank you for saying that. It's a lot of fun to talk to people, get different perspectives, and I'm hoping that people can learn a lot from it. And my hope is that it helps grow the sport and reach other people and spread awareness. So I appreciate you saying that. It's a lot of fun, and I appreciate your time.
Hey, you too, Jeff. Hey, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys, go check out Steve at cbspigeon.com. Check out the Continental Classic, and we'll have you back on for an update here soon.
Talk to you later, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Bye, everybody. Bye.